It's Friday, which means it's time for another exciting episode of Ask Us Anything. Bahir and Uma with you. Our first question this week is from Travesty. The Oscars are around the corner, and he asks, in conjunction with the upcoming Oscars, apart from Best Supporting Actor Actresses, which is predictable, the rest seem quite open. Who's your pick for Best Feature, Director, Actor, Actress, Screenplay, not forgetting Best Animated Feature? Do you have a list? I have a list.
I'm looking through it now and I can come up with some. They're not really predictions. They're more of who I would pick for winners.
Same. It's who I would like to win as opposed to who I would think is going to win.
Because they're two completely different things.
Let's go one by one. Let's do Best Feature first. I know what you're going to pick. Conclave.
Yes.
Actually, it's my pick as well.
Ah, interesting.
Of all of the movies, I think Anora probably deserves screenplay. Conclave deserves Best Picture, even though the odds makers have Anora at a 53% chance of winning because of the seeming controversies around the other movies.
Around everything else. Like, I haven't seen Nickel Boys. I haven't seen I'm Still Here, Amelia Perez. I haven't seen A Complete Unknown. I haven't seen The Brutalist. So, of the few that I've seen, Conclave is my top pick.
Best Director, who you got?
Who are you going with?
I am going for Coralie Fargat for Substance.
Okay, yeah.
I think it's very rare that a horror movie gets selected. I think Corbett's going to win, but I think The Substance is like fucking bold and out there in a way that a movie hasn't been in a long time. Like, I have not had such a visceral reaction to a movie in a very long time. Like, a movie has not made me squirm in my chair the way that movie has.
Yeah, and none of it being particularly male-gazy. There's a lot of... They're not sexual undertones. There's no sexual undertones in the film.
No, it's all really, like, uncomfortable.
But Coralie Fargat just does it really, really well. And I agree with you. The Substance feels like the one that should win.
Actor, actress, who you got?
I think Chalamet has just been taking all the plaudits with all the other smaller festivals, so that could be it.
But Adrian Brody's been winning all the bigger ones.
So I'm wondering if that's just going to split it. No offense, I don't think Coleman Domingo's got a chance, only because Sing Sing, I don't feel like Sing Sing was a film, from the sounds of it, that the Academy would pick.
For me, it's this. For me, I think what a lot of people fail to realize is all of this also boils down to what people have watched.
Yeah.
And a lot of the voters haven't watched everything either. And I think Sing Sing was a very underwatched movie. And I think that's the problem. And I'm not sure how many people were inspired to go, oh, let me watch this movie now that Coleman Domingo has been nominated and I have to make a vote on it.
Yeah.
For me, actor, I think Adrian Brody is going to take it.
Oh, interesting.
But I wouldn't mind if he did. Just because he's just excellent. However, I would really like Ralph Fiennes to win it.
Did you see that quote? Someone had interviewed two Academy voters and they said they had both voted for Brody because, in their words, Ralph Fiennes has won it before and they wanted to give it to someone else.
I saw that. And like, no, Brody's the one who's won it before, guys.
Yes, dummy.
Ralph Fiennes has been the excellent actor who has hardly made any missteps, who has never won an Oscar. That's Ralph Fiennes, jackass.
So I'm really hoping for Ralph Fiennes.
For Best Actress, I'm going for Mikey Madison for Anora. However, I think Demi Moore's got it in the bag.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah, I think it's been her season. I think it's one of those things. If you listen to a Golden Globe acceptance speech, that felt like a campaign for the Oscars.
Right, okay.
Because it was her going, you know what? I've been ignored my whole life. Every producer, every director, every studio has said you are not that kind of actress. Yeah, you are the commercial actress. You're never going to win a single award, right? And that's essentially what she said at the Golden Globes. And I think she's been in the industry for so long. It's one of those things where people are going to go, it's Demi Moore's time.
Yeah, Mickey Madison's too young, too soon, too new.
Carla Sofia Garzon's just... I mean, she's attending, apparently. Like, Netflix is now paying for her to attend, but I don't think she's winning anything.
I'd like to go with you. I'd like Demi Moore to win.
For Best Adapted Screenplay, it's Conclave all the way for me. I know Nickel Boys is in there, and I haven't seen Nickel Boys yet, but I hear tremendous things because people who have read the novel have said it's amazing what the director did because it's such a hard book to adapt. But I think the way Peter Straughan has adapted Conclave and the way it's then been directed and put on screen is amazing. So I think Conclave.
Yeah, I'll go Conclave.
For best original screenplay, I would go for Honora. I'm also angry that Dune is not in the best adapted category, but that's a different story.
I can see Honora winning it, but I'd like A Real Pain to win it.
I would not be upset with that win either. And finally, best animated feature, it's got to be The Wild Robot. I mean, I love Flo, and Flo has done well in all of the indie stuff. But I think when it boils down to the Oscars, I think Wild Robot. Wild Robot was one of my favorite movies of last year. I think it deserves the win.
I loved The Wild Robot. I haven't seen Flo, but my choice will be Flo. Only because it's about a cat. It's a small town film. I kind of want the underdog to win that one.
Well, there you go, Travesty. Those are our picks for some of the main categories. We're not sure if we're going to be correct. They're not predictions. They're just the movies we think should win. And we'll see what happens on Monday. Monday morning. I think it's actually screening on Disney plus Hotstar and not on Astro this year for the first time in ever. Our next question is from @JohnGullidge. Neil Gaiman, to cancel or not to cancel? Discuss. This is a difficult one. I have a lot of Neil Gaiman merch now, which I think is worthless. But maybe if I wait long enough, it'll come back around to being collectible. But I've been thinking about this a lot because of the various directors, actors, writers, people of some fame and repute that have been cancelled over the years and what we do about the art that they produce. I still think, and it's not an easy thing to do, but I still think that it's worth separating the art from the artist because I think back to what the works of Neil Gaiman gave me as a reader. And I need to separate that from the human being because his private life, his misdeeds aside, the stuff that he wrote impacted me profoundly. As a kid growing up, as a person who was inspired to write myself, all of his works had a positive impact. It's similar to J.K. Rowling. Whatever her opinions are on trans rights, I think children who had read the Harry Potter books and gotten good values out of those things cannot be ignored. The values of those things cannot be ignored. And I think bad people can create good work.
Yeah.
Same goes for Woody Allen. The same goes for Bill Cosby. For Bill Cosby, it's a little hard. I haven't been able to watch or listen to his stand-up. His stand-up is fucking genius. And I haven't been able to watch The Cosby Show, which is also another work of genius. And the impact that The Cosby Show had, not just on a generation of Black Americans, but on generations of brown people all over the world, I think is really important, despite his criminal acts, right? And so it's whether we can reconcile that stuff. So for Neil Gaiman, I think you can, if you want, you can cancel him as a person. Hey, I don't like you anymore. But I'm not going to cancel his work. I'm not going to cancel Sandman. I'm not going to cancel Neverwhere or American Gods.
I think for me, the big question is less about the works they've done in the past, but the works that may come up in the future. I think that's the harder question, right?
Yes.
Sure, you're right with J.K. Rowling and Neil Gaiman and the books you've read, but how willing are you to go out and not even support the guy, but go out and buy his next book? I think that's the harder question.
That is the harder question. The problem is that he is a once-in-a-generation writer and once-in-a-generation mind. And I enjoy that writing a lot. I don't think these acts detract from his ability to write. So if he actually manages to put something out, I would be genuinely curious to see what that is. I don't think anyone's going to publish it anymore. And I think that's another question to be discussed. But I think with publishers going, oh, we're not going to do reprints of his works, or we've got a planned edition of Sandman coming out and we've cancelled it. I think that's ridiculous. I think that's virtue signaling more than anything else. And that kind of discourse, I think, is kind of pointless. I think you need to have a very mature discourse about these things. And not just Neil Gaiman, but J.K. Rowling as well, Woody Allen, Roman Polanski. I think their works have impacted people in profoundly good ways. And so let's not cancel that. I think you can dislike the individual and ignore the individual, but I would stick with their works.
I think at the end of the day, it's what helps you through the day, right? If reading an old Gaiman book helps you through the day, go for it.
Yeah.
Come on, Harvey Weinstein, he was an executive producer on all the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not watching the Lord of the Rings once a year. Does that make me think of... No, it doesn't make me think about Weinstein at all. But I think that's the key, right? I think if you loved Gaiman's previous books, I loved Anansi Boys, I loved American Gods, the stuff he did with Terry Pratchett. I will probably still reread those if I wanted to. Would I read a new Gaiman book? I mean, for me, it's a question I need to ask at the time. If it's a follow-up to American Gods, then I might have to because I love those books so much.
Also, all of this is still dependent on what the actual truth is. And we don't know what the actual truth is. We may never know what the actual truth is, right? And I think all of that is up in the air as well with regards to how this situation finally plays out. It's a little clearer with something like J.K. Rowling because it's her saying those words. So you're actually judging her by her own words and her own actions, and she's not denying them, and she's not distancing herself from them. So it's whether you believe in her philosophy or not, and whether you think that philosophy influences the things you read that she writes. Because the writers aren't necessarily the works as well. They're writers, they create worlds, they're actors, they portray characters. We often mistake one for the other, but it's not always the case. And I think more and more we're realizing that, right? And I think that's why we're so disillusioned these days, because we put them up on a pedestal, but then we realize actually they're human and they're flawed and they're complicated and some of them are terrible human beings. And it's hard reconciling the beautiful characters they've created on the page or on screen with the reality of who that person is.
At Brandon Ho Shengven asks, with this week being the launch week for iPhone 16e, it will also mark the end of an era for Apple's Touch ID. What are your thoughts on the discontinued feature? And if the discontinued feature would ever return, how do you think Apple should re-implement the feature on future Apple devices?
Hey, we got a tech question. That's cool.
Cool.
I like this question because it reminded me of how revolutionary Touch ID was when it first launched on the iPhone, because fingerprint ID isn't something new. Like, we used to have it on old laptops as well, like Compaq and HP laptops used to have like fingerprint sensors on it, and they were terrible. They were like those little scanner things, and like it was a clear glass with a light behind it, and it would hardly work half of the time. And that used to be like the best we thought we would get on a consumer level. I mean, we're not talking NSA shit here, right? But when the iPhone came out with Touch ID, it really felt like NSA shit because it just worked and it was fucking magical. And yeah, that was cool. But yet again, their Face ID thing is working so well. I mean, facial recognition is working so well. I think UK airports are now going to implement it instead of passports, where there'll be no counters. There'll just be cameras that track your face, pick up your ID. You've uploaded a scanned version of your passport, and it knows exactly who you are. Like, face recognition technology is so good, they can actually get rid of Touch ID. And I don't think you need multiple points of verification like that. So I don't think Apple's going to reintroduce it. I mean, they currently have Touch ID on their iPads. I think the iPad mini has it. And that's implemented into the on-off button. And that works great as well. So I think they're slowly going to move away from Touch ID and may not ever bring it back. Like some Samsung phones and Android phones have an under the screen Touch ID, but that doesn't work 100% of the time, I found. So I think Face ID is still a lot better.
I liked it. I'm not fussed about it one way or the other. I mean, I never got to use it on the MacBook Pros, I think they were on.
Yes, they have a little button on the top right. The power button is the Touch ID button.
Yeah, I never got to use it on those devices, but yeah, it was great. But I also really just love my facial ID.
More often than not, it is seamless.
Yeah.
At X-Ray and Drops asks, I'm not really following the Batman comics, but I'm interested. What does the Batman reboot mean for his story? And what are you most excited to see in the reboot?
Well, is this me? Is this going to be me?
I'm a bit behind on my Batman reading, but
Right.
I will say this, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see Alfred back. I don't know if it'll happen, but I miss Alfred. So in the actual Batman run at the moment, Alfred was killed. And he stayed dead.
For the most part, no.
For the most part, yes.
Yeah.
There are other comics where Alfred is still alive. Like there are other Batman stories. But in the main Detective Comics Batman line, Alfred is still dead. So DC are going to reboot, start again from number 1. I fucking hate when they do this every time because they'll do it for a few years and then they'll go back to like, oh, okay, we're going back to number 757 now. I'm just like, for fuck's sake. Anyway.
So that reboot is essentially going to happen post Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee's Hush 2, which is happening in March. After that, they will essentially relaunch with issue 1 with a new writer team, which is something you're very excited about because one of your favorite comic book writers is joining up. Yeah, so I mean, if I was gonna say, if you want to jump in, I would say if you've read Hush 1, get Hush 2 and then go from there.
I think you can just start from Batman 1, can? Usually when they renumber,
yeah,
it's like a fresh start with new stories and new arcs and everything.
I don't know. They've got a new costume. Apparently, they've already announced the new Batman logo for it. So I'm not sure if they're going to go one again where everybody's sort of back at zero. I'm not sure if I like that idea. But at any rate, I would say wait for that. But I would say if you're jonesing for something, I say pick up Hush 1 if you haven't read it. Hush 2 drops in March, so pick that up. I will say don't bother with whatever's currently running. It's a great run, but if you're going to start, I think just wait for when they launch it. I think in September or August. If you're jonesing to get into a Batman now, I would say try and look for the Absolute Batman series. That's really good. It's a completely different take. It's a completely new look on it. All your favorite characters are there in a sort of alternate version of the ones we know. So that's where I would go with. What I'm excited about, what I would like to see, what I'm excited about, I don't know. I've seen so many versions of the Damians and the Dick Graysons and the Red Hoods and the Batman International and Batgirl and the other Batgirl and Batwoman and like I've seen so many of those. I'm just letting them do whatever they want. I agree with you. I think I would like to see, if not Alfred back, at least an Alfred-like character. So 2 people reached out and asked us about Zero Day at Nazrin Saad 87 and Rabbit Hop. Have you seen Zero Day?
I haven't yet, so I'm going to leave this one to you.
Okay.
What did you think?
I saw it.
Have you finished it? It's a 6-episode limited series on Netflix with Robert De Niro.
Yes.
Playing a Biden-esque president.
Yes. I really enjoyed the first half of it. The second half sort of really feels like they're just trying to finish off a story, which is not, it's not terrible, which is fine. But again, in Netflix fashion, they do certain things at the beginning of the show where they never kind of bring up again. So, for example, one of the things that they sort of start very early on is that Robert De Niro's character does this sort of like Sherlock mind palace thing. They did it 3 times in 2 episodes and then never touched it again.
Right.
Which I thought was just a strange decision to make because it's really, the way they did it was really cool. So there's a real sort of visual aspect to it, but then they never go back to it. There's a thing about a thing that feels important, but then the story sort of just ignores, only to then wrap up again in the last episode. But overall, it isn't typical Netflix fare. It is better than that, but not by much.
If you are looking for a great presidential story, though, Paradise, Stop Sleeping on Paradise.
Stop Sleeping on Paradise.
7 of the 8 episodes are out, and it is great fucking television. I am enjoying every bit of it. It is good.
Yeah.
I will go check out 0 Day. It's only 6 episodes, so I will be sure to check it out.
Yeah.
Iman Bahari has a question for us. He said there was an interesting thing that I've seen on Reddit that I would like to ask or echo here. What do you think both Marvel and DC as major franchises, especially when it comes to superheroes, can learn from each other? Whether it be their inclusion of new additions into their IP or flourishing their already existing characters, perhaps even an adaptation scale or business model. That is a great question. I've been thinking about this question. I actually think that James Gunn at DC is practicing some of the things that he wants to do based off mistakes that Marvel has done. I think the number one thing that he keeps repeating is that he will cancel a project if a script is not ready, and that he will not start shooting until they have a final script in their hand.
And that's something that he and Peter Safran have both proven to have done.
Correct. And I think that's very important because we've seen what happens with reshoots, with shifts, with changes. We saw it with Secret Invasion. We saw it with the Marvels. We're seeing it with Captain America. And I think during the Bob Chapek era, because he was of the mindset that we need to churn out as much content as humanly possible, quality was sacrificed. And then when Bob Iger came back and he's trying to correct the ship now, I think we're only beginning to see the start of that. At this point, we're going to see it with Thunderbolts, with Fantastic Four, because I think Brave New World was the last big thing that was greenlit under the Bob Chapek era. Like even Daredevil Born Again was completely overhauled. And I mean, they had shot a shit ton of stuff and went back to the drawing board. And everyone's been talking about it. Like no one has been shying away from it. The producers, the directors, the actors, they've all been talking about how Feige was open to criticism from the actors and went, okay, we need to re-look at this because it isn't working. And they delayed the release and now it's coming out next week. But I think that's the one big thing that DC seems to have learned from Marvel. In my opinion, I think the other thing that people need to learn is to not judge every franchise or universe using the Marvel model. Like Marvel changed cinema forever. And now the negative aspects of that are coming into play where people are looking at what James Gunn is doing and going, oh, this doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, well, it does kinda, because not everything has to be interconnected with everything else. And not everything has to follow on. Things can exist in pockets. They can stand alone. There can just be good stories that need to be told, right? And so I think one of the negative consequences of the MCU is that everyone expects these interconnected stories now, and even Marvel's backing off from that trend because they see how problematic it can be when something never ends.
I'm hoping DC never picks up on the post-credit scenes things.
Marvel needs to kill that.
I disagree with you. I don't think Marvel should kill it. I think Marvel should treat it as an inside joke now. It doesn't have to be an interconnected thing to the next universe. You cannot, in a post-credit scene, introduce fucking Hercules.
Actually, that's going back to how they initially conceived it.
Yes.
In Iron Man, it was just an inside joke.
I think you cannot introduce new ideas. The Doctor Multiverse of Madness post-credit scene.
With Charlize Theron.
It's like, are we going to do that? Are you going to actually do Kit Harington? You've introduced the voice of Blade, but is the actor still going to be Blade moving forward? You can't guarantee that anymore. So just make it a joke. Do a Deadpool thing. It's okay. I think that is a problem now. I hope DC never picks that up.
I think the one important thing that DC can learn from Marvel, and I think they're doing that right now, the mistake DC made was to try and play catch up and rush everything. And that's why the Snyderverse was as big a failure as it was. Partly due to Zack Snyder being Zack Snyder, but also that they didn't give this franchise time to breathe. So these characters didn't get to live on their own before becoming a part of something bigger. I think it'll be interesting to see what James Gunn does over the next 4 or 5 years, because he has said that he is not building an interconnected universe the same way the MCU was, but rather trying to tell good stories that he's found in comic books.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we're getting a Supergirl movie, which is quite disconnected from traditional lore. It's based on a comic book that's a little out there. It's great. It's not like a super origin story. Who is Supergirl? What is she doing on Earth? Where does she come from? Etc. etc. I think that's why we're getting a Clayface movie. I think all of that's absolutely fantastic because in a lot of ways, Bahir and I read a lot of serialized comics, but we also love these standalone stories that pop up every now and again. And in many ways, they tend to be like the best ones. So I think it's already happening. And I think Marvel is learning from themselves as well. Like news just dropped yesterday that after Daredevil Born Again, Punisher is going to have a special standalone movie like the Werewolf one and Guardians of the Galaxy, like a showcase, like a Marvel one-shot, which is apparently written by John Bernthal, which is great. But I think that's the way forward. You've got these characters, you've got interesting stories, you make that call, hey, can this work for 18 episodes? Can this work as a 2-hour movie? Or is it just a 60-minute thing? Because that's the best way. Like the Netflix mistake is trying to make everything a 10-episode series, or in the case of Stranger Things, trying to make every Stranger Things episode a 2.5-hour film. That's not knowing what you want. And it feels like there's more of a direction on both sides.
I love me Green Lantern, and I love the fact that there are a lot of Green Lantern content coming out, but I don't need the animated My Adventures with Green Lantern to be canon to the Lanterns TV show, which is then going to be canon to the Superman movie. I don't need it.
It can just be a standalone story about Jessica Cruz, which will be fucking cool.
Is it Jessica Cruz? Is that confirmed?
I believe it's Jessica Cruz, yeah.
Man, they love putting Jessica Cruz in the cartoons.
Yeah. Jessica Cruz is cool, though.
I love Jessica Cruz. I'm curious to see if they bring in the Simon Baz relationship, because not that they have a relationship, it's just that the two of them are almost always together. I don't need to know that the Robert Pattinson Batman is in the same universe as the Corin Sweat Superman. It's okay. It's fine.
Who the fuck cares?
It may make it harder to explain to your mother and your father about why there are two Batmans, but it's okay.
But also, I don't think they care. I think because they come from a generation where the James Bond actor would change and it didn't matter. It was just a new guy playing James Bond.
But I think it matters only because of the MCU stuff.
But for me, that is also the problem, right? Because we've reached this point where we've just started associating actors with roles and being unable. And I think that is a problem with the current generation's thinking. Like, yes, I loved Chadwick Boseman. I thought he was a great human being, but fucking recast Black Panther already. He didn't own that role. I think we should be able to move on. I think, fuck it, get someone else to play Indiana Jones. It's fine. Yeah. We were very accepting of it with James Bond. And I think that is the template that you can use because, sure, some actors were better than others. And the bad actors didn't last as long. Sorry, George Lazenby. But the stories were great. And so it didn't matter who was helming it. As long as that person had a certain amount of charm and charisma and kind of fit the tone. It's like Sherlock Holmes. We've had dozens of Sherlock Holmes, but it's the stories that are great, and that's what we want to see.
It's the same with the whole brouhaha about Robert Downey Jr., right? Coming back as Dr. Doom. It's like, it's okay. It's fine.
Like, I know they're going to try and tie it up with him as Iron Man and Tony Stark because of the whole multiverse thing, but fuck, I don't give a shit. They don't need to. If he just shows up as Dr. Doom, that's fine.
My only comment about it is that I hope Robert Downey Jr. isn't Robert Downey Jr. as Dr. Doom.
But he's a very good actor, so I think he can pull it off.
Yeah.
Our final question for the day is from @OralB80. How happy are you guys that Kathleen Kennedy is stepping down, and what can we expect in the near future? We are not happy at all, OralB80. We are not happy at all. We are not happy at all. I know there is a generation of incels that are celebrating that Kathleen Kennedy is stepping down, but I also think that they are fucking idiots. And the reason I think that is because if you look back at Kathleen Kennedy's body of work, beyond Star Wars. She has produced movies that have defined at least 3 generations, from E.T. all the way to The Mandalorian and Grogu, which is coming out next year. And in between, you've got Empire of the Sun, Arachnophobia, Hook, Jurassic Park, Benjamin Button, Munich, Seabiscuit. Her body of work is absolutely tremendous. And you know what? Even if we look at her Star Wars body of work, I think she has been a better custodian of the franchise than George Lucas ever was. George Lucas, bless him, he is the creator, he is the god of it all, and we respect him for that. And I think his imagination and world building is unparalleled. However, as a custodian of Star Wars, I think she's done an incredible job. And she's had more hits than misses. Yes, we talk about Solo, or we talk about The Rise of Skywalker, and maybe Boba Fett, and some people didn't like Acolyte, but they're wrong. But I think her hits, Ahsoka, Mandalorian, Andor, Skeleton Crew, the animated stuff, she's done some great things with Star Wars, and I will be sad to see her go.
Can I also say there will be people out there who are less well-read than you and I don't read that much, who will say, oh, the good stuff is all because of Filoni. I'm like, yes, I agree with you, but at the same time, Kathleen Kennedy is the person at the top who allows for someone like Filoni to thrive. That's what you need. So if the rumors are true, and there's some going around that Filoni might be taking over from Kathleen Kennedy, I think that's actually bad for Filoni fanboys. Because that means Dave Filoni can no longer write shit because he's got bigger business things to do.
Exactly. And so, unless he has a Peter Safran like James Gunn has, he is going to be caught up doing all of the boring studio stuff.
And meetings with Disney and all that shit.
Honestly, I think Filoni should stay within the creative side of Lucasfilm.
I think the biggest mistake Kathleen Kennedy did while she was in charge of Star Wars was doing that calendar announcement. When she announced a whole host of movies that none have come through. I think that is her biggest mistake. I don't think that's her. I think that's a Disney board
But
decision.
just to go back to our previous question, that is also a consequence of the MCU.
Yes.
That is how they get shareholders excited.
And studios have always done it. But they've never invited fucking idiots from Instagram to those meetings.
Of course.
You know what I mean? Like, so for example, when Gunn cancelled a couple of his DC projects, people are like, oh, is Gunn dead? Is DC Studios going to make mistakes? I'm like, no. This is exactly what you want a professional, educated, creative mind to do.
This is good business.
This is good for everything, right? If the movie you announced for a date in 2037 is not coming along, you cancel it and or push it back. You don't fucking rush it. You don't fucking force the writers to just keep writing and then we'll shoot it and then we'll figure it out in post.
I mean, Gunn was really blunt. Gunn said, there are some writers that I wish we hadn't hired.
Yeah. And I think that's key. So to go back to Kathleen Kennedy, I am incredibly sad that she's stepping down because, I mean, I don't know if that means she's retiring and she's just going to go in some farm somewhere and just relax for the rest of her life, which I think she completely deserves.
Or she can do an Amy Pascal.
Because I think her eye for story, I think her eye for collaborators is still, one of the best.
Agreed. I think she will go down in history as one of the best executives in Hollywood.
A lot of those films you mentioned, a lot of people associate with...
Oh, like Steven Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis.
Yeah,
sure.
All those guys.
But I think those are the same people that don't realize the amount of work that a producer does on those movies.
Not only that, but the fact that Steven Spielberg will keep going back to Kathleen Kennedy means that she is a vital part of his machine.
Very sad to see her go. We don't know if it's confirmed, right?
I think there was some quote that she said she's looking to retire at the end of 2025.
Let us know how you guys are feeling about this, but we're very sad to see her go, and we think she's done tremendous work and has been a great custodian of the franchise. All right, that brings us to the end of another exciting episode of Ask Us Anything. Bahir and Uma with you. You know how to reach out and keep asking those questions. We're on Instagram at GogglerMY. You can also email us on podcast@goggler.my or send us a WhatsApp on the Goggler hotline 012-524-5208. Thank you so much for listening. This is the Goggler Podcast.